Guys, today we're going to be doing our pre and post testing. This is where we say, hey, this is what the weapons were like before the big update, and this is what the weapon is like after the update. Now, today's list is going to be consolidated down to just our exotic weapons. The update that rolled out with Revenant was very, very large, which is why we're going to be chopping things up separately between exotic weapons and exotic armor. And as far as super damage goes, we'll be doing live testing over on our Twitch channel if you want to come check us out for that. With that being said, though, let's dive into our exotic weapons and the changes that came with Revenant. First up, we have Choir of One. Now, we've known for a while now that Bungie was going to nerf this weapon, and it's finally here. Choir of One has had its base ammo reserves reduced from 250 to 200, and with reserve mods, it has been reduced from 384 to 300. They've also reduced impact damage of the point-blank projectiles by 50%. They've increased hipfire projectile damage against players by 10%, and you can now spawn with 7 ammo in Crucible up from 5. Now, quite a bit has changed here, guys, but let's address the elephant in the room. Did Bungie just kill Choir of One? I'm happy to report that these changes are extremely minor, to the point that if you use Choir today and compare it to the last episode, you probably wouldn't notice much of a difference. First, looking at PvP, you can see here that pre-patch, we deal 201 damage plus 56 damage. In post, we do 213 plus 31. Now, on a side note, if the damage looks weird in the clips that we have here, that's because private matches once again seem to be broken. Now, the biggest change in PvE, though, is probably going to be the ammo economy. 200 base is still very nice, but now we're going to have to lean into things like ammo finder mods, some scavenger mods, and even look into things like the new special ammo finder enhancement mods, just to keep us topped off. Now, in terms of the damage pre-patch, when it comes to our point-blank shots, that's the shot that is within about 7 meters. And on Choir of One, this is dealing 35,382 damage against Coral. Now, post-patch, that damage has been reduced, now hitting at 30,165 damage. Now, this is actually about a 17% nerf, which is much less than the 50% damage reduction Bungie was referring to. Even if we were just comparing the impact damage pre versus post, it's still only a 7.5% decrease. Regardless though, guys, 17% I can live with. And after playing around with these ammo changes, I can live with that too. I think Choir of One is very much still a monster. Now, before we continue, I do want to briefly mention that our exotic weapons have also been affected by the global weapon tuning in PvE. This is the change that made it so that auto rifles, scout rifles, pulse rifles, SMGs, sidearms, and hand cannons are all dealing around 5 to 7% more crit damage and 5 to 7% less body shot damage. Now, it's not something super noticeable, but keep in mind, Choir of One is one of those weapons affected, as the normal hipfire damage was dealing 32,015 damage pre-patch, and post-patch it's now dealing 29,780 damage, which is roughly a 7.5% decrease. Now, nothing too major, but a change nonetheless. What is substantial though is the change to sniper rifles. You see, sniper rifles as a whole has had their damage increase across the board against everything except bosses. Minors 60%, majors 75%, mini bosses 35%, champions 25%. These are some stacked buffs handed out to sniper rifles. Now, what this means is weapons like Whisper or Icebreaker, those weapons just got massive buffs. You can see it in effect here at Coral, who was a mini boss. With Whisper at pre-patch, we were hitting for 69,288, which is quite nice. But post-patch, we're hitting for 93,560, which is a hell of a lot more damage. That's that 35% increase. I want to mention this because while a weapon like Whisper didn't get a buff directly, it did benefit from these blanket changes. So something to keep in mind, guys. Sniper rifles are definitely weapon types to consider inside of PvE, especially our exotic ones. Now, moving on, we have a weapon that we were all very excited to try after hearing about its buff. That, of course, being Huckleberry. The old classic has finally gotten a much needed change and rework. And let me just say, guys, it's spicy. Huckleberry now intrinsically fully reloads on kills, and it's had its catalyst replaced with kinetic trimmers. Now, a quick refresher on Huckleberry. This is a kinetic 750 round per minute SMG that comes with the exotic trait Ride the Bull, which essentially increases rate of fire and recoil the longer you hold the trigger, and now fully reloads the magazine on kill, whereas before, this was tied to the catalyst. Now, Huckleberry also has old Rampage, and what I mean by that is that it takes normal Rampage and bumps it up to 11. For instance, at 3 stacks, which is max, this grants us a 66% weapon damage buff. compared to base Rampage's 33%. Now this lasts for 3.5 seconds and can be indefinitely refreshed with kills. Now on top of all that, it has been given kinetic tremors. And if that gets a kill, that too will also proc Rampage. Literally the AoE effect here, guys, can give you a stack of Rampage. Now unfortunately, kinetic tremors is not buffed by Rampage itself, which is quite the bummer. Now in terms of kinetic tremors on Huckleberry, just like other SMGs, for example, Multi-Mach, it takes 14 shots to proc kinetic tremors. Now I will say Multi-Mach does have the slightest edge due to the fact that it can enhance kinetic tremors, meaning you could proc it in 13 shots rather than 14. But without a doubt, guys, Huckleberry's a monster. And paired with the newly reworked Peacekeepers, it puts out, man. Next up is another SMG with a change that was handed out to it with this update, that being Tarrabah. At one time, this weapon wreaked havoc in the Crucible, but those days are far behind us. In an effort to boost it up slightly, Bungie has added a solar damage resist effect while Ravenous Beast is active. Now this is 50% damage resistance against combatants and 15% damage resistance against players in PvP. Now inside of PvE, guys, this is noticeable, but there's really no indication of this buff being active outside of Ravenous Beast. Essentially, once Ravenous Beast falls off, then you lose that damage resistance. Definitely a bit situational. I think the point is that you can build up Ravenous Beast and then you can push aggressively, at least against enemies that are dealing solar damage, and gain damage resistance while fully amped. And you can see it here working even in things like PvP. Notice our solar hand cannon right here goes from doing 80 damage to now 68 damage with Ravenous Beast active. Again though, keep in mind, like Wrist Runner, which gives you damage resist against Arc, Tarrabah and Ravenous Beast here gives you damage resist against Solar. Now our next weapon here is Symmetry, which reads that it now gains a stack of dynamic charge on kills in addition to precision hits. Now this is a very small quality of life change for Symmetry, but still a welcome one. You can see here pre-patch, only landing precision hits would grant a charge, but now any kills with Symmetry grant charges, and because of that, precision kills will now grant 2 charges. One from the precision hits and one from the kill. Symmetry, no lie, could actually be a sleeper pick for this season. We have artifact perks that boost it up quite a bit, from things like anti-barrier scout rifle, retinal burn, which reads that rapid arc weapon precision hits consumes an armor charge to blind the target with a boost, causing it to emit a blinding burst. This paired with trace evidence, where rapid precision hits or rapid final blows on targets affected by jolt or blind will generate ionic traces. With the boost granting armor charges from ionic traces, guys, you have beautiful synergistic loops here of blinding enemies while building dynamic charges and ionic traces. If there was ever a time to dust off old Symmetry, now would be that time. Now moving on to our next weapon, we have Duality. Bungie has given it a Black Wings buff, where the max stacks reduce from 5 to now 3, and they've extended the duration from 7 to 10 seconds. Again, a quality of life change here for Duality inside of PvE, only requiring 3 hipfire kills to reach max damage, which is a welcome one. And you can see here pre-patch, it required 5 stacks to hit for 88,357. But here now at 3 stacks, we still hit for the same at 88,357. And shotguns here are definitely seeing more play this season. With anti-barrier shotgun being present, many of my loadouts have contained a shotgun. And I know most people look at Duality as mainly a PvP shotgun, and yes, it is very good at PvP, but inside of PvE, guys, it may be worth considering. Now next we have a very interesting one, Bad Juju. Now at first, this seems pretty standard. The changes here include having the lifetime of string curses being increased from 3.5 seconds to 5.5 seconds at base, and 7.5 seconds with the catalyst. Now as a reminder, String of Curses provides additional super energy and damage per stack up to a max of 5. Now at 5 stacks, we get a 2% boost to super energy and a 100% damage increase, and every kill refills the magazine. Now it also got its magazine size increase, and a very welcomed increase from 27 to 36. This was one of the biggest complaints I had about Bad Juju, was that mag size. Now Bungie also stated, and I quote, "The weapon also appears to have become more haunted than it used to be." Now we didn't know what Bungie meant by this at first, but in our testing we found that it seems to have a hidden intrinsic that was already present before, but much easier to proc now. You see, Bad Juju technically always had this, where it would seemingly and randomly cause an enemy to explode upon kill. Now, there's been some debate on whether or not it was completely random to get those explosions. Some people have even said it takes somewhere around 140 to 150 kills to trigger. But after this update, Bungie has streamlined things. They have now made this just outright a part of the weapon. Simply landing 3 rapid kills will now trigger this explosion. Now, quick disclaimer, we aren't really 100% sure on how this works. We have some clips of it, proccing after 3 rapid kills, but we also have some where it seemingly just happens. Now we're speculating that this is tied to how many stacks of String of Curses you have, but as of right now, it's a bit unclear. We're going to be looking at this weapon more deeply, including it with some builds, but for the time being, guys, this has been an incredible buff for bad Juju. In the clips you're seeing, the explosion does very solid damage, and it has a pretty wide radius. This, alongside the buffs to String of Curses, has now made bad Juju a very solid pick. Now, speaking of pulse rifles, we have 2 that received a buff, as well as a slight nerf, those being Graviton Lance and Revision Zero's, most notably Revision Zero's Heavy Burst Mode. Now, these both had their damage reduced by 8%, but at the same time, they've had their rounds per minute increase, alongside our other 2-round burst pulse rifles from 300 to 324. Now, talking about the RPMs first, this is something you'll definitely notice, especially if you use weapons like Nullify or Graviton Lance last season. As for the nerf, this actually turned out to be nullified by the global crit damage buff all pulse rifles received. You can see here at Carl with Graviton, we hit for 3,173 damage for the first shot and 4,293 damage for the second shot. This is pre-patch. But post-patch, we hit for 3,166 for the first shot and 4,284 damage for the second shot. A whole 16 damage difference. Now do keep in mind, while landing crits does even out this nerf, body shots are dealing less damage. Now here on Revision Zero, it's the same deal. For pre-patch, we were hitting 4,471 damage per crit, but post, it's 4,481. Now in terms of body shot damage, you're looking at roughly a 6% decrease. So while this was poised to be a slight nerf for Graviton and Revision Zero, it ultimately netted out to be a buff with that RPM increase, keeping these primaries towards the top of the DPS charts. Now something to note is that Revision Zero's sniper mode pre and post patch damage has remained unchanged. I know that seems common sense, but sometimes things do overlap. On top of that, the projectile damage from Graviton Lance's AoE has also remained unchanged. However, there is a weird bug that we encountered with Revision Zero, is that for some reason in the heavy burst mode, you can't fire the sniper rifle. You can see it here. It's charged, and I'm literally clicking shoot, but nothing happens. However, in the full burst mode, it's working. So hopefully this gets addressed soon. Now, next on the list, guys, is one of my favorite weapons in the game, Diris. We have done so many videos on this weapon, especially when pairing it with builds that include Moth Keepers on Hunter. And let me just say, guys, it's moth heaven. If you like spitting out moths left and right, please, for the love of God, try Diris with Moth Keepers. It's beautiful synergy. Essentially, Bungie has given Diris here a 33% increase to direct hit damage against combatants. They've also adjusted the recoil to have an overall flatter projectile to essentially make it easier to land shots from afar. They've given it +5 to reserve ammo, and they've also given it the ability to spawn a moth on 2 direct hits. But even more so than that is they reduced the moth cooldown from 4 seconds to 3 seconds. Now keep in mind, guys, I was already using Diris with Moth Keepers before. I thought it was good already. Granted, the weakest point of that build was probably Diris itself. Unfortunately, Diris did not receive the damage buff. You can actually see it here at Carl. We hit 32,996 damage pre-patch. And at Carl again, post, we're hitting 32,996 damage. This is no buff, Bungie. Hopefully Bungie sees this, guys. Probably just got left off the list. But if you've been shooting Diris, thinking to yourself, man, damage seems very similar. Well, that's because it is. Other than that, though, looking at the projectile side by side, it does seem to be more flat, as stated in the changes. And the ability to create moss on 2 direct hits is fantastic for laying into heavier health targets. We get that damage increase, guys. Diris is golden. Next, we have 2 grenade launchers to look at. One being Fighting Lion, and the other being Prospector. Now, looking at Fighting Lion first, this now causes a volatile burst upon landing direct hits. Now, you can see here that it works in both PvE and in PvP. Now, something to note is that you can bounce the grenade, then hit an enemy to achieve the same effect, as in it does not require a straight shot through the air, which is very nice. No lions out of PvP, guys. With Fighting Lion, you could be pretty annoying with this. Next up, though, is Prospector, another very old exotic that needed some desperate need of love. Now, this got a complete rework. Bungie removed the sticky grenade, as well as the flame grenade and the remote detonation function, and it now spawns 3 cluster bombs on detonation. Now, defeating targets causes enemies to explode in an arc explosion, similar to chain reaction. Now, taking a look at the damage here, the old version would hit Carl for 37,563 damage, and then burn 5 times each each for 1,093 damage, giving us a total of 43,028. Now though, the reworked Prospector hits for 38,402 damage, and then it spawns those 3 clusters, which hit for 7,585 each, for a total of, get this guys, 61,157 damage. Fellas, this is a substantial increase in damage for Prospector, and you can see here, when those clusters spawn, they do spread out quite a bit, which is fantastic for ad clear. Now, in a boss like Coral, you can see them kind of spread too much, and you can actually see them miss, which is why big bosses are going to be much better for this. Think the second encounter of the newest dungeon. Now, the last 2 exotics wrapping up our list are Chaperone and Lumina. For Chaperone, this got the ability to trigger Roadborne on 2 rapid precision hits, in addition to precision kills. And further precision hits with Roadborne active will extend it by 3 seconds. And while it's active, you also gain plus 20 stability and plus 25 reload speed. Now, Chaperone also got a base ammo reserve bump, which is very nice. These are all welcomed buffs, essentially making Chaperone a more appealing option inside of PvE, kind of in a similar way to Duality. The goal here is to maintain Roadborne's buff, and again, that buff nets a ton of different stat benefits, but it also increases critical damage, which is exactly what you're trying to do with the precision shotgun, is land crits. Now, our next weapon is Lumina. This weapon received a change to have its noble round projectiles behave more similar to the hipfire rounds from No Hesitation. Now, this was Lumina before. You can see when you shoot the Seekers, it takes a second to find your teammate. Then it would proceed to seek aggressively. Now though, that same triangle that's present when using No Hesitation is actually there when you use Lumina. And if you hip fire when that's present, you'll see that noble round track straight to the target very fast. However, shots that are fired without that marker being present functions identically to how it used to function before. Overall though, this is a nice quality of life buff though for Lumina, especially if you're trying to get those buffs out super fast. So that's it, guys. Those are our exotic weapons pre and post. We'll be making a video here very soon on our armor pieces, and we'll have that super damage cut coming as soon as we're done. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.